There is not a single biochemical pathway which requires ingested carbohydrate. I say it over and over again. We do not need a carbohydrate in our diet. Everywhere where the blood glucose is elevated, you're toasting your tissue. So you're toasting your kidneys, you're toasting your brain, you're toasting your eyes. Every single corner of the body. And that's just one aspect of the glucose metabolism. The crunch time for me was when I had a guy in his 40s that I was considering amputating both of his lower limbs. I ended up amputating one of them. And he was sitting there in hospital eating ice cream. The pathology within his limb didn't happen on that last week. It had built up over decades. If you have more than 4 grams of carbohydrate at one hit, it's going to affect the lining of every blood vessel. It damages that. If it goes above 4 grams, you'll produce insulin. Insulin also is an inflammatory hormone. It's also a growth hormone which stimulates cancer. We're not talking about very much. And this might seem somewhat extreme. I'm talking about a bite of an apple.
Another question that people ask is, well, what do I eat? Everything seems bad.
Okay, I'll summarize it in one sentence. I often say, if you want to eat by the food pyramid, you're going to die by the food pyramid. We've screwed ourselves over.
If you think you're eating healthy, you might be surprised by what you hear from my guest today, Dr. Gary Fettke. There are some foods that I bet you're eating every single day, which is slowly causing disease. Now, this information is not what you're going to hear from the mainstream. You won't hear this from big food or big pharma, but it's advice that could potentially save your life. And now for the episode with Dr. Gary Fettke. Dr. Fettke, welcome.
Good morning or good afternoon, evening, wherever you are.
Now, you are an orthopedic surgeon for the last 30 years, and you've seen so many patients at the end stage of their chronic disease who need their legs or their arms amputated or cut off. And over 90% of the reason for this is because of the foods that we are eating.
Now, the crunch time for me was when I had a guy in his 40s that I was considering amputating both of his lower limbs. I ended up amputating one of them, and he's in hospital and trying to control out of control infection in both of his feet and legs. And he was sitting there in hospital eating ice cream. And I said, "Why are you eating ice cream?" He said, they told me I can have it. I then started looking at the hospital food guidelines, which said it's okay if you've got type 2 diabetes and it's out of control, that you can still be given ice cream 3 times a day with morning and afternoon tea and supper snacks, including biscuits, cakes, cookies. A totally ridiculous diet with no nutritional benefit, yet that was actually the national food guidelines, and it still is. And I've presented the national food bodies about that. And they say, no, it's not. And I say, look, here is your document. I started challenging the hospital food, going, this is ridiculous. But I then started studying nutrition, which is something we're not taught in medicine. And so I started studying, in particular, the role of sugar. But effectively, I challenged the hospital food system and particularly the sugar content. I then went on this thing called social media, and within 48 hours was targeted by someone who was working for Coca-Cola at the time. And over time, I was then targeted by people who was working for I was targeted by the breakfast cereal industry, and we've got all this documentation to prove that. Then I was reported to the medical board for inappropriately giving nutritional advice outside of my scope of practice, even though we're talking about preventative health. I'm advising my patients, stop eating sugar, particularly if you've got diabetes, and stop eating ultra-processed food, particularly if you've got inflammation. And so I got reported to the medical board, and by a dietitian at the hospital, and we take the trail back, we've got the emails and the receipts from the food industry, the breakfast cereal industry, to the Dietitians Association here in Australia, the CEO of the hospital, of the Dietitians Association, demanding that the CEO of my hospital silence me. I wrote back to them pretty well saying, that's a joke. But they took it seriously. As it turned out, I got reported another 2 times over the next 2 years, one of which was for inappropriately reversing someone's type 2 diabetes on national TV. So it was inappropriate to put someone's type 2 diabetes into remission.